Today's guest is a true Renaissance thinker in the world of venture capital and innovation. Ben Narasin is the founder and general partner at Tenacity Venture Capital and one of the earliest investors in companies like Dropcam and Lending Club. Over the past 2 decades, he's blended a love for storytelling, grit, and strategic foresight to back breakthrough founders. In this episode, we dive into what separates good founders from great ones, why first to brand beats first to market in the AI race, and how data might just become the next gold rush. Only this time, we'll be renting out the mines. If you're building something new or betting on the future, this one's for you. I'm getting started here with our friend Ben Narasin. Ben, absolutely pleasure to have you on the show today. And the first question I got to open up with is what got you interested in the intersection of humanity and technology?
Well, thanks for having me, of course. I'd say the greatest compliment I was ever given, there was a woman that worked at Kleiner Perkins that once said, "You are really a true Renaissance man." And I always loved that. That very much resonated. I think that we as, human beings should be as well-rounded as possible. And that is the conflation of an unlimited number of interests. And so technology, to be totally fair, when I first discovered the web, so my background is entrepreneur for 25 years, started one of the first .coms in 93, took it public in 99, and then took it private. Well, when I started my web business before becoming an investor, which I've now done for 18 years, when I started my web business, the internet had been around for a while and I'd been using it, but the web was something new. And to me, this was going to change the world. This was going to be the biggest thing in my lifetime, and I wanted my part of it. But bluntly, part of what I liked about it was, all this technology means I don't have to deal with people anymore. People, there's always something. They're mushy, it's pain, unpredictable. Not true at all. So technology enhances and empowers people for good or for bad. And, look, I don't have an explicit mandate in my investment. I'm not a double bottom line or triple bottom line firm, but I fund phenomenal founders that want to do great things. And I think that makes the world a better place. And so when that evolves humanity or it helps them in some way, and look, to be realistic, it's like if you watch the first episode of Silicon Valley, we are here to change the world of administrative technology support within the enterprise stack. Okay, whatever. So any business done well, at a minimum, creates jobs. At a maximum, can actually have material and meaningful impact on people's lives over time. And, I retired for a while, and one of the reasons I got back in the game, so to speak, was the mental stimulation that comes from always seeing what's next, what people are trying to do, how people are trying to change the world. That's really, really exciting. And I think by its nature, that is definitively the intersection of humanity and technology.
It's a beautiful description of like how this all plays together, that a business's role is to create jobs at the minimum, or that's a byproduct of effectively what it does.
You got to have a North Star, right? You have to have something you're questing towards. You have a belief structure that you can change something because something is needed to make something better in some area. And no matter what, I think that has a positive impact. I mean, first of all, these are young, talented, brilliant people. They are excited to create new things. Like in the old days, there used to be a saying that to create great wealth required a crime. And that was probably true in the robber barons days. There's some pretty horrible stories about what some of those people did. But today, to create great wealth, you need a brilliant idea and phenomenal execution. And because of that, a lot of people chase their dreams. And many of those dreams don't succeed. But the ones that do can be pretty amazing.
I do think that there's a true power in technology that allows us to kind of like decide what it is that we want to be doing. And it takes away the need for us to interact with people that we probably wouldn't want to be interacting with as well in some capacity. How do you balance that desire to basically introvert, right? To kind of like separate with that need to be, convincing people of the vision that you have, right? Because as an entrepreneur, your main goal is to sell the idea, to get people on board, to being part of that.
Yeah, look, I used to think there's two different answers to that. On the last point you made, I was a freelance writer for about 10 years. And so because of that, I used to think that I overvalued storytelling in an entrepreneur. I've come to realize you cannot overvalue it. Storytelling ability is how people raise money. It's how they hire people that are going to probably have to take a pay cut to leave their big company job to work for a startup. It's how you land clients. It's how you get PR. And that happens in person. The second answer, I give you something. I made an investment just coming out of COVID in a company called Vendalux, which explicitly is sort of it's Salesforce for in-person marketing, trade shows, events, et cetera. And my thesis was that coming out of COVID, sales teams would have become way too comfortable and way too lazy, bluntly, at doing things remotely, doing things over Zoom. But sales managers would realize that's not good enough. But because of the competitiveness of the workforce, if they forced their people back on planes for 186 days a year, they'd quit and go work for some startup that would give them a job. So today, Citibank announced, hey, we'll still let you work from home. Probably the only bank that's doing that. Probably going to be good for their hiring, not necessarily going to be good for the quality of their talent. So I believe that what would happen is these sales managers would be stuck in this position where they're like, well, my people don't want to travel, but we got to get in front of our customers. Wait a minute. Why don't we just go to trade shows where our customers are anyway and throw a bunch of dinners and parties and take conference rooms? And that is exactly what has happened. Trade show attendance has exploded, and that company's done exceptionally well. Interestingly, even though I don't believe anybody will evolve by being a stay-at-home worker, I let myself fall a little bit into that trap. 2 years ago, 2023, we were counting, and we were on pace to see 8,000 pitches. A lot of those came from watching online demo days. We funded 3 companies. So in 2024, I pretty much dropped all of that online activity and spent all my time traveling, going to trade shows, going to events, going to conferences, going to meet people, having lunches, re-engaging my network. And I saw probably 2,000 pitches and once again funded 3. It's always a very low conversion rate, but 3 out of 2,000 is a little better than 3 out of 8,000. So, I don't value it if it's not in person. I value this. I think this is a great communication mechanism. It's a great tool, great to have a conversation, great to have that conversation archived for anybody that wants to see it anywhere. But if you want to evolve in your role as a human, no matter what that is, you got to be out there. You got to be in person. Even an artist needs other artists, right? The Renaissance happened in a place because great artists fed off of other great artists. Look, I'm not an extrovert by nature. I had to train myself to be outgoing and to be a networker. When I started in around 2007 and starting one of the first institutional seed funds in the world, I knew about 8 VCs. By the time I left, I knew 327 at the top 10 firms. And that came from a very active effort to go out, find and meet these people and find a way to get to know them. It's just a skill you got to build.
There is the aspect of finding your tribe, right? Like, and actually going out and making the effort to be part of a community and to grow that. I'm still fathoming the idea that you would go through 8,000 pitches in a year and fund 3. And from a sales perspective, I can understand that investing in sales are quite different activities. What is it that you're looking for when you're choosing the 3?
So, it's not like I have a target of 3.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, it just happened that like in total, we did 9 the first year, 6 the second year, 3 the third year, and 3 the fourth year.
Okay.
I prefer not to be on a trend of 3. That would take me a very long time to deploy the fund. But I'm looking for phenomenal founders. Number one answer to your question, I'm looking for founders that make me say, wow. There's a visceral reaction. What I've learned over time, when you look backwards at, in this case, 18 years of investing, you learn things about yourself and about what worked and what didn't. And one of the things I learned is there's no deal that goes well that you didn't fall in love with the minute you met it. It being the person and the opportunity. I need 5 things to make an investment. People, a great idea, a huge market if it works. It's not that you fall in love and say yes. To be crass, it takes me 1 to 3 months to figure out whether it was love or lust. You got to look at the market. You got to look at the competitive landscape. You got to look at the entrepreneur. You got to spend as much time as you can with the entrepreneur. My fund is called Tenacity Venture Capital for a reason. Tenacity is the only secret to entrepreneurial success, since brilliance is assumed, or I wouldn't have funded you. A great idea is assumed, or I wouldn't have funded you, as I just said, and a huge market's assumed, or I wouldn't have funded you. The difference between having all of those things, brilliant people, great ideas, huge markets, success and failure, often comes down to whether or not that person will step up again when they get knocked down on the mat one more time. Entrepreneurship is an incredibly difficult journey. I would argue it's the hardest job if you're not a first responder. It's the hardest job that exists in an office. A lot of people that go into a pursuit of entrepreneurship don't understand that. It's not something you can be taught with words. But when every single day you go out in the world and get hit in the face with a virtual sledgehammer, you're going to learn it. And the question is, are you then going to give up, or are you going to just keep pushing through? And that trait, that grit, that tenacity, that drive, that ambition, that's required. By the way, going back to the in-person and connectivity, the only way I'm ever going to try to even guess whether you have that is spending time with you, and I'm spending time with you in person. And so when I do diligence, my diligence is an enormous amount of time, if I can get it, with the entrepreneur, trying to understand what drives them, what they need versus what they want. Very different things.
Can you teach tenacity?
No. I mean, you can learn it as an individual going through it. Hard times make strong people. What's the term, like iron becomes steel by going through fire or something? We heard all this stuff during COVID, by the way. These were like, you got to stick with it, man. But it's like the horse to water thing. I can say, you got to have drive. You got to never give up. But I mean, to use the metaphor, if Mike Tyson punches you on the face and you're lying on the mat, assuming you haven't been knocked out, you can either will yourself to get back up, or you can lie there and just let it all go and move on with your life. I can't fund the second. I also can't teach the second. You can evolve it by, look, I mean, this is a silly little thing, but I believe I can live to 120. And a lot of that is around staying fit, staying thin. And so anything I can do to make my life harder physically, I do. Like when I walk to the library to read the paper, I carry 2 big bags of rocks. It's called farmer's carry. Or I run instead of walk, or I take stairs instead of elevators, or whatever. Like just looking for small opportunities to make things harder, not easier. The things that technology have done to make our lives easier have weakened us as individuals and will cost us in lifespan. It is the reason that it's one of the many reasons why, over half the US is overweight. So I think there's a mental exercise where you commit to yourself. It's not that it can be taught, but there was a great quote once: if you do not have a characteristic and you need it, assume it of yourself. And I'll give you an example when I used that once. I'm not a organized guy in the traditional manner. I don't do checklists. I don't have, oh, here's my process. I keep a calendar, but that's about it. So I was buying a company in the UK called Boo.com. And we had like 24 hours to buy it, and then 48 hours to get all our assets out of there. So I would wake up in the morning and I would assume of myself the anal retentive characteristics of a checklist, super organized guy, because I knew I had no margin for error. I would write everything down we needed to do. 1 goes to 2, goes to 3, goes to 4. And every morning I'd wake up, I'd say, man, you are one organized, tight ass guy, and you are going to follow that book. And I just insisted that I follow that process. I assumed of myself that personality, which I did not possess, because I needed it in that moment. So arguably you could assume in yourself absolute tenacity and grit. I love the elite soldiers. I'm fascinated by them. I try to read lots of books. I have friends that are SEALs or SEAL program team. And, there was one guy who was talking about going through the SEAL program. And he said, if you're going to get through hell, you got to be the devil. He said, I just made it harder on myself. If it's like, you want me to do 100, I'll do 200. You want me to get into the cold water, I'm going to stay there. I could stay on the sand. No, I'm going to go into the ocean. Like just constantly pushing himself to make it harder on himself, to make himself stronger. But I think that's either in you or it's not. I think it's not something I can teach you. You may be able to teach yourself.
You're hitting on like a core concept of, wow, a lot of spiritual exercises that I end up getting into work around identity. Right. And so if you can change your identity, you can change your behaviors at a much easier level, just like you described about waking up and being an anal retentive guy that runs his life by a checklist. That's an identity, right? Like I see myself as an athlete. And so when I go to the grocery store and see the Oreos, I am less likely to pick them up, right? Like that's because the identity makes those decisions easy to take care of. We talked about brilliance. We talked about idea. We talked about the people. What are the other qualities that you're looking for in the idea that makes things attractive for you as an investor?
Well, I generally prefer green fields. I often say to an entrepreneur, look, I would rather fund you to walk into a green field and build a teepee out of sticks than to have you walk into a small village and build another house. I would prefer new things.
So is that like new markets or?
Well, remember my first point was I'm looking for entrepreneurs to make me say, wow. So here's the pitch I don't like. Well, so and so, so and so, and so and so have raised $100 million on this concept. So that's validated the market. No. What that's done is arm your enemies against you with tanks, and you're asking me for a knife. I'm not interested in that. I will give you a knife to walk into that field and hunt dinner. Okay. But that's it. If there's somebody there with a pistol or a rifle or a tank, I'm probably not going to play in that game. It could be a new market. It could be a new approach to a market. It could be something that hasn't evolved yet that's needed. I haven't, it's not that I've never funded people in competitive spaces. I funded a great company called Maestro, which is an all-knowing chief of staff that lives in your system and tells you where to look in your businesses using LLMs, using generative AI. Now, there's a handful of those, but I got referred to them through one of my entrepreneurs, a guy named Siki Chen, and he had been using it, and he said it's the best of all of them. And that included like a Sequoia-backed company with $100 million behind it. So very, very good team. It appears to me they're in the lead. Now, look, first to market is not good enough. First to brand, however, I believe is. If you look back in time, eBay was not the first auction site. I believe On Sale was. Also, there were about 12 auction sites, including Amazon and Microsoft and Netscape. And yet now there's just eBay. They weren't the first to market, but they were the first to brand and the first to the network that created. And so you didn't need to go to other places. And I think that's often true. I think particularly in, as I spent 18 months trying to figure out how to invest in generative AI, I've decided data is not a long-term moat, and first to market isn't either. But while brilliance is definitely required and some great computing power, I do think if you can get to be first to brand, you have a really good shot at going all the way. Got a company I invested in called Hippocratic that does this, which LLMs for nurses. Basically, an LLM does the job of a nurse when you get exited from the doctor's office or hospital and does the follow-up call and actually talks to you and makes sure you're keeping, yourself in order. Phenomenal. Could other people do it? Yeah. They've been very well funded. They've got phenomenal partnerships. They're in great deals. They're definitely first to brand. Now they got to hold on to that and make sure to continue to grow and evolve. And I think they will. I think it'll be a huge win.
In the generative AI space, we've just come off a couple weeks of interesting releases from all the providers, right? Where do you see that space going, or are there businesses that can actually build a moat around their generative AI products?
So this is why it took me 18 months to make my first investment in generative AI. And last year, all three of my investments were in that space. Not because I explicitly and only looked at generative AI, but because that's where the best and brightest ended up. And when you're funding the top one BIP, your goal is certainly to fund the best and brightest. So the primary thing I reached as a point of view here is that it is going to be about first to brand, because you can't protect the functionality. The functionality exists on somebody else's engine. There were 2,000 car companies in the United States when the automobile was invented. You got to figure out who's going to be Ford. By the way, I mentioned that to a guy in Germany. He's like, yes, there were 2,000 car companies in Germany too. I said, really? He's like, yes. You know why the Audi has 4 rings? It used to be 4 companies. So I did not know that. So, there is room for Audi. There is room for Ford. There's room for a bunch, but there's not room for 2,000. And so who gets the distinct market segmentation and gets to market and builds their brand at a level that becomes the moat? The brand does become the moat. Now, you have to have the data. Over time, I think everybody will get access to the data. You probably can get more insights because you had more time, and that will compound, but I still don't think that's a protectable moat. So, and whatever, you use what? You use OpenAI, you use Anthropic, whatever. Somebody else can buy that too. You can't compete on the engine. So you have to find something else. So Ford might compete on the F-150, number 1 pickup truck in the country and probably in the world. Okay, that's their thing. Good for them. Porsche competes on Porsche, which as far as I can tell is really one car. I mean, yes, they make a bunch of cars, but it's 911, right? So, you find your niche. Now, there is probably a place like Hippocratic where things are slightly different. And this is where failure is not an option. So, in the old days, you could sell software where it was 80% less, but it could only do 80% of the job. You can't replace a nurse's outbound call. You're not actually replacing the nurse. The nurse has plenty of jobs with something that gets it right 80% of the time. That's not okay. It cannot, you're risking lives. I mean, Theranos got into a whole lot of trouble for doing what every entrepreneur does. Fake it till you make it, because people looked at it differently because it was argued that it put people's lives at risk. There's a different bar. You probably can't, in legal, you can't go before a judge using generative AI and make a mistake. You can't say case law says X and then have the judge say, that's not what case law says. No, you're not going to end up staying a lawyer. So there are categories where the data fluency and accuracy are even more important. Do I care if Perplexity gives me an answer that's wrong sometimes? I mean, I don't know if they do. Answers seem good enough for me. My son's convinced it's a BS engine, which was the title of an article, but net, I think it works pretty well. And I think all of these systems will get better and better and better. And ultimately, we will become, as a category, it is like I never believed when people called crypto Web3 or DeFi Web3. I get into arguments on this all the time. It's like, why don't you show me all the industries that have been fundamentally changed by Web3? You can't. In fact, you can't even show me one. The web changed everything for every company. And I believe generative AI has a good chance of doing exactly that as well. Now, I think for most companies, wait a year or two and you'll have the tools you need. You don't need to build it yourself. But if you're I'm not talking about if you're building a generative AI company, but I was with a group of YPO folks that I brought over to speak to one of my most cogent CEOs on AI. And they said, well, what should we be building now? And he's like, just give it a year and all the tools will be available to you. Everybody's baking it in. It's last point here. It's going to be tough to compete with the entrenched. In the old days, you could compete with the entrenched because the entrenched were slow, monolithic companies that couldn't innovate. That's not who you're competing with here. You're competing with Google and Salesforce and Microsoft. Those are not slow movers. Okay. Google will come after you hard. Amazon, who wants to compete with Jeff Bezos? Really? That's what you decide to pick? No. So if you want to be GAI-based Salesforce, really? Because I'm pretty sure Mark's going to put it in his engine, right? Like, why would that add value to you? But if you're a company, by the way, it's funny, the first generative AI company I almost invested in was about 2 or 3 years ago. They were using LLMs to do order taking in fast food restaurants drive-thrus. I was like, perfect. How hard is it for a system to say, do you want fries with that? I mean, the training data is pretty finite. Also, I thought, what a niche market. They'll have a nice time to get to first to brand because nobody else will care about it. If they land McDonald's, they win because everybody will buy the leader's products. If you sold McDonald's and I'm Burger King, I want you. Or Chick-fil-A, I want you. Here's the problem. McDonald's announced about a year ago, they're building out their own generative AI team to build their own LLM. It's like, are you kidding me? Classic, just big company. Like, really? You got to own it, huh? You really have to? You have to build it because you're so highly qualified. You can certainly hire the best and brightest away from OpenAI to work at McDonald's, right? Because they've been waiting for you to call. Just silly. The need to own versus buy sometimes amongst these big companies. But here's the thing. It'll fail, and then they'll buy it from somebody else. It's just that take longer.
And I think you're hitting on an interesting point here that Salesforce, Microsoft, Amazon, they're all going to build the generative AI tools into their platforms. And that's what they are doing. And they have that advantage because I'm using Microsoft Word, I'm using Google's, products, the work suite as well. And then additionally, our CRM also has AI capabilities in it as well. But all of those systems, all of those solutions only have access to their data. And so for me to create an AI that has like our brand to it, we don't get a cohesive view. Like I can't ask my CRM what's going on in my finances or our marketing. And at the same time, I kind of understand why a company would like to develop expertise in this, because now you're building out intelligence as an employee inside of your business instead of, as a consultant that's coming in.
And I think this is a key point because here's one of the misperceptions I believe is in the market. Early on, people are going to protect their data fiercely because they believe it's a proprietary value. Over time, I don't think that will be true. The first conflict will be everybody thinks they have a data lake. A lot of people are sitting in data swamps that aren't and need to be refined. But the second issue is this. You have this data that's so valuable, it's so secret, it's so special. Maybe you make $1 million a year on your internal LLM for 2 million, 3 million, 5 million. But I bet there's 1,000 companies that would value that data to train their LLMs. Now, when they use it to train their LLMs, they don't get your data. They borrow it to train a system. This is like hiring a great math instructor to teach a kid math. The math instructor does not lose agency over his or her knowledge of math, but he has now empowered a student to go forward in the world with better math skills. Okay. Someone was like, well, I don't want, they're going to have my customer accounts. No, they are not. The LLM is going to learn from a corpus of content. And my point being, if that's true, and you don't have to give up your data, you just have to loan it to a system that doesn't know you from Adam and doesn't care, it's just learning. If 100 people pay you $1 million a piece, that's a lot more money than you're going to make on your own. So ultimately, excuse the extremely crass term, everybody that's protective of their data will become data whores because they will get paid so much for selling that data. Reddit right now, to my understanding, last time I looked, 2 $60 million a year contracts to train LLMs using their, I would consider, garbage dump of data. It's probably the vast majority of what drives the public stock price. The data set you have can be resold infinitely, but it can only be used for your own benefit once. And by the way, wouldn't you want to get everybody else's data too to train your LLM and make it better? So I have an investment in a company called ScalePost. It is a marketplace exactly for this. They start off with like 50 content providers like Time Magazine and Harvard Business Review. There's no data that isn't valid for a marketplace. If you're in the, I don't know, that painting behind you, let's say modern art painting business, and you need to train an LLM and you have 472 paintings worth of data, great. But wouldn't you like to have the MoMA's data? Wouldn't you like to have, the best art dealers in the top 10 cities in the world's data? Well, that's all interesting data for you if that's what your business is about. The narrower the data set, the more expensive it is on a per unit basis. And the broader it is, so Reddit, volume, an enormous amount of data of highly questionable individual pieces of value, and they get paid $60 million. But Harvard Business Review, very narrow slice of data, but highly valuable. They probably get paid a lot on a per data point basis. And so ultimately, I don't think you can rely on your data to protect yourself or your company if you're starting a GAI company. And I don't think any company will protect their data because it's just too much more value to them to monetize over time. You are better off renting out your land to an unlimited number of people to set up tents. It's still your land. They don't get to take it with them.
How do you protect the value of that data?
Well, the data itself trains the system. It doesn't keep the data. It's not like, I think someone was like, well, can't someone then ask the LLM like who my top 10 customers are? No, that is not how this works, or it's not how it should be. And I'm sure you can put caveats on this. There used to be a company that Google bought, or DoubleClick actually bought, called Abacus, and then Google bought DoubleClick. And what they did was, this was in the era of the catalog, the paper catalog. So every catalog needed to expand. So Eddie Bauer wanted to expand and get access to LL Bean's list. So Abacus was started as a co-op. They would mail catalogs for Eddie Bauer to the LL Bean mailing list. LL Bean would get paid. Eddie Bauer would keep any customers that they got who placed orders. They did not get LL Bean's mailing list. Abacus ran LL Bean's mailing list for the outbound mailing. Eddie Bauer had no idea where their catalogs went. They just knew that a certain number of catalogs went out, and they knew how many people ordered. That's how I view the training of LLMs. Your data goes in, and what you get back out is merely the end result that's factored from combining all that data together to give you some answers or some insights. But normally, it's just like, let's use my example of Hippocratic, this great company. They trained their nurses off of nursing notes across many, many major hospital groups. Nobody's sitting there saying, well, what does, big famous hospital group in Des Moines think of this? No, the nurses, the digital nurses, know what to look for. When they call you and they ask if you're taking your meds, they sort of know how to tease out from you whether you are or not, and to help you figure out how to be more effective at that. But here's the thing. If you say, I've been experiencing shortness of breath, they immediately send you to a human being. That is a red light. That is a huge warning. And they learn things like that from the data they got from these 10 to 35 different major, hospital groups. That doesn't impact any of those hospital groups. It just makes the nurse better at its job. And that's where this goes. I go back to the mathematician. Mathematician teaches the child becomes more adept at using math. It does not dilute or take away from. It's not like you're removing it. I think people will move from this binary view of the world. Oh my God, it's either mine or yours. You can't have it. I have to protect it. No, this is not about you getting a slice of the pie and me getting a slice of the pie. This is about making bigger pies, right? Instead of 8 slices of pie and a pie that can feed a family, I want a pie that can feed the entire United States. When you move to that mindset, that shifts how you think about using your data. And by the way, I'm not asking you to shift your mindset because you make the world a better place. You're shifting your mindset because you're getting paid a lot more. You're shifting your mindset because you now get to monetize that data that you've spent decades accumulating in a way that does not harm you. It's free money.
Interesting. Ben, I got to say, it's been an absolute blast, like talking to you today. One last question. Any advice that you have for either entrepreneurs getting into the game or other business owners as well?
Well, I mean, I do believe that, it is hard to fail if you refuse to give up. I think that I've seen many, many examples of people driving all the way to the edge of the cliff and surviving because they were, that's probably not the perfect metaphor, but the knock down and get back up scenario is definitely it. Here's the one thing I would say if you're considering being an entrepreneur. If it not working out and you giving up is one of the possibilities you see in your mind, just don't even bother to start. It takes a certain amount of being either irrational or arrogant to be an entrepreneur. It takes an enormous amount of ego and mental energy to watch everybody tell you what you're doing is stupid and it won't work, as they've told every successful entrepreneur since the beginning of time. But if you're willing to listen to that, if you're willing to value other people's opinions on why you're going to fail, if you're willing to consider that failure is one of your options, I don't think you're an entrepreneur. It doesn't mean you won't fail, but the very fact that you allow that into your own mindset of possibilities, I would argue, is the first step. Failure cannot be an option. I mean, I'm going to say this because it's funny when people, when I talk about this, like, the number one rule of either being a vegan or doing CrossFit, right? You have to talk about being a vegan and doing CrossFit. Okay, so I do CrossFit. Well, CrossFit, they always put an exercise on the wall. It's called the WOD, workout of the day. That's incredibly hard. And you look at it and you're like, oh man, I don't even know if I can get through that one. It's very rare you're like, I'm going to nail it. You might think that, by the way, you're always wrong. But at the end of the day, if it's 100 pull-ups and twice a year we do 1 mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, 1 mile run. It's called Murph. You don't do that by saying, let's bang out 100 pull-ups. You do 2, 4, 6 or 3, 6, 9 or 5, 10, 15 pull-ups, push-ups, squats. And then you make a notch. And then you say, do it again. Or when you're lifting really heavy weight, you say, 1 more rep. You do a clean, you drop it on the ground, you breathe, you do 1 more rep. And you do it until you hit the goal. That's entrepreneurship. You do it and keep doing it until you win. Period. Stopping, giving up isn't an option.
Fantastic advice. Ben, thank you again for being on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a fun wander.
Absolutely.